Okay, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and anybody just tuning in for the first time, got a double bonus today. Got two big hitters from the industry. We've got Glyn Hughes, Global Head of Cargo for IATA, and we've also got Michael Rossell, who's the Deputy Director General External Affairs for ACI. Gents, great to have you on board. I'm getting used to having two at a time now. This is the second experience, so hopefully I'll bounce things around equally between you. And thank you very, very much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Chris.
Yeah.
Great. Now, lads, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to be a little bit more upbeat, even whilst a lot of the news is still, pretty challenging and pretty negative. So firstly, can you just give us a little bit of background about yourselves, what your organisations are focusing on at the moment, and why the two of you are coming together?
Great. I'll start. Thank you very much, Chris. Glyn Hughes, I've been with IATA now for 29 years. I've been in the air cargo industry for 37 years, man and boy, and before that. And as you know, IATA were predominantly there for three functions in the industry, which is help with industry standards, help provide industry solutions, and spend quite a lot of time on industry advocacy. And it's actually during the current crisis where we've obviously been heavily engaged in all of those. And, from my perspective, it's been probably, apart from the sad implications of a global pandemic, it's actually been pretty phenomenal to see how the air cargo industry has actually stepped up. We always knew this was a great industry filled with great professionals, but it's how the industry has really rallied around the innovation that's been employed to make sure that the medical equipment and supplies that's needed around the world to help in the fight have actually been moved. So it's as I say, it's been very, very rewarding to actually support the industry that's doing such a great job.
Great. Thanks very much, Glyn. And Michael?
So good day, everybody. I'm the Deputy Director General at Airports Council International, and I've been there for 8 years. Previous to that, I was a UK civil servant. I worked for the Department for Transport, and I've worked in Brussels, and immediately before joining ACI, I was the ICAO representative the United Kingdom representative at ICAO on the ICAO Council. And that's the body that takes all the decisions with respect to international civil aviation. So it was rather natural that when the opportunity to join ACI came up, I took that, and instead of representing a country, I now represent the airport industry. So what are we doing? ACI is a trade representative organization. We represent more than 1,900 airports around the world. We have a twin message, which is advocacy, where we are representing the voice of the world's airports. And then we have an excellence role where we help our airport members through things like customer service and through training. And we have a program which some of you may have participated in, called Airport Service Quality. And that is where we interview passengers at the point of departure so that we're able to benchmark what our passengers think as they pass through airports. Thank you.
Fantastic. Right, great. Now, lads, bringing you both together, and also with a platform that the WHO has called 3 Cs, communication, cooperation, and collaboration. At this moment in time, and it's great, you're representing all the airports, Michael, which is fantastic. And what people are saying is that there needs to be a platform of consistency so that people are doing the same things. And I take that back to pre-COVID, when you used to go through, whether it was security work, you go to one airport, sometimes even in the same country, one airport, take your shoes off, one you leave them on, another one you take your laptops out, another one you leave them in, you got your watch, etc. There was so much sort of difference that people that would travel on a regular basis, they would get frustrated, and also passengers for a one-off, they'd be thinking, well, why? Now, one of the things that's important now as we move forward is to try and get some sort of consistency so that we're able to measure and judge what's really effective and what's not. Now, Michael, let's start with you now. Now, how important is that to do with airports? And do you see that there'll be clusters of airports agreeing on certain things and working more closely with other airports that are doing the same?
This is exactly the question that we are tackling right now. We as ACI do not set standards. ICAO sets the standards. They have a fairly long and complex process of doing that. They have this thing called Standards and Recommended Practices, SARPs.
Yeah.
And they set out exactly what airports and airlines and manufacturers and pilots and so on and so forth, everything to do with the aviation industry is concerned. So these standards set out what is required. What we do as ACI is that we look exactly at the questions that you have raised, and we say, well, what works for our airport members? What do we need to change? What can we support? What can we recommend? And importantly, what sort of guidelines can we provide then to our membership as to how they implement these standards and recommended practices? So in terms of what we are doing right now, and I've already had a couple of meetings on this, it's clearly how are we responding to the COVID-19 crisis? How do we bring back normal operations? The call that I was on this morning was to specifically with health experts from around the world. And it is a group called CAPSCA, and I am going to have to read out what CAPSCA stands for, and I will do it only once. So CAPSCA is the Collaborative Arrangement for the Prevention and Management of Public Health Events in Civil Aviation. So there will be a quiz at the end to see whether anybody can remember what that stands for. So
yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that.
CAPSCA is made up of around about 70 or 80 states. It includes the World Health Organization. It includes organizations such as ACI and IATA. And we get together on a regular basis to try and thrash out exactly what makes sense for the industry around the world. This isn't a new organization. It's been through things like SARS and MERS and flu and all of this. So there is experience in the process.
Okay.
And
sorry, just to cut you off there. The most important thing that I think you said there, which I would be thinking about if I was listening back, was you said what makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. So what we're doing at the moment is we've started with cargo crews, and this is Glyn's expertise. We started with cargo crews to say, can we define something which could be described as, and ICAO calls it a public health corridor concept. And the idea is that you've got clean crews on clean aircraft going through clean airports and using clean facilities. And this is to facilitate the movement of the crews of cargo flights to and from their destinations. And just on Monday, ICAO has published an electronic bulletin, and that sets out in some detail the guidance to the crews, to the states, to the operators as to what is expected. Let me stop there and let Glyn jump in on this. And then if you want to go into more detail, I can say a bit more about what exactly is required.
Good man. It's very, very, very considerate of you. Before I go over to Glyn, so one of the most important things, I think, and it's something that we've had a lot of questions on, is because obviously pilots going in and out on cargo, if they had to be open to the country directives of 2-week isolation, etc., you'd never get crews going anywhere, and it would hold up the supply chain. So I think one of the most important things for everybody to understand is no matter where it comes from, whether it's an official body, a regulatory body, a government, there are a set of guidelines. However, then when things that are so important to keep the world turning or ticking, certain modifications to those guidelines have to be done specifically for that particular purpose. But it's not breaking the rules or going against them. It's under a different controlled set of criteria. Yeah, so Glyn?
Yeah, in fact, Chris, that's a good segue into what I'd like to mention, following on from what Michael had said. Just first of all, addressing the concern that you raised there. I think it has to be said, and it's appropriate at this point, to actually recognize that ICAO has really stepped up during this crisis. Like many international bodies, it often has the sad moniker of being perhaps a slow organization, but they have, during this crisis, responded incredibly well with a number of state letters. The issue that you just talked about there, they've issued at least 2 relating to the ICAO Annex dealing with facilitation. States around the world to facilitate the exemption of crew, cargo crew, from restrictions and quarantine provisions, provided they are isolated and do not come into contact with the public or potentially affected people during overseas trips, etc. That has been instrumental in ensuring that cargo can and has been able to continue to operate and move through the system when it has been most crucially needed. So that has been one very positive reaction by ICAO. What Michael just mentioned as well about the CAPSCA report is also critically important for Aviation Restart, because they looked at air cargo crews and the air cargo scenario, because that's the one that's been operating under difficult circumstances. But all the guidance that's come out in this report that was published earlier this week effectively becomes the starting point for passenger crews and Aviation Restart. So it's looking at things like crew health cards. It's looking at sanitization of the cockpit. It's looking at crew facilities, rest facilities overseas, making sure that there are segregation and that there are appropriate procedures in place. So there is another area of work which again is being conducted under the ICAO banner, which is something called the CART Group, which is the Council Aviation Recovery Task Force. This is another group where ACI, Secretary General, and the IATA Director General, and also the ICAO, SecGen, and a couple of other organizations and a few states. And they are looking at the necessity for, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, harmonized and consistent guidance when it comes to industry restart.
Yeah.
Aviation is a global industry. It touches every corner of this planet. Well, it would touch every corner if we were a square, flat planet, but I don't know, every component, every country, every territory around the globe. And it's absolutely critical that when restart happens, that Michael's members, our members as airlines, so the airports, the airlines, the ground handlers, all other participants in the supply chain, and the public. And this is where it's also necessary for restoring public confidence and shipper confidence in this industry, have consistent and harmonized approaches to a restart. So this CART group has then convened a number of subgroups. One that we're involved in quite extensively is a drafting group looking at sanitization and biohealth from a crew perspective, from an aircraft perspective, from an airport perspective, from a passenger perspective, and a cargo perspective. So the CAPSCA report, plus a number of other states, you know, if you look around the world, everybody's produced their own documents. ACI and IATA have produced some joint collaborative guidance, which we think has been also, it's been well received by the CART drafting group, who've included many of those provisions in the overall guidance. And I think the time frame, Michael, is at the end of May, the CART group will hopefully have signed off on this first draft. And we're also including, where we can, nice visuals, because the key objective is to provide this guidance document for all the civil aviation authorities and therefore all the people in the industry around the world to implement. So it can't be, and I know, Chris, over the years, you and I have had discussions about, you know, the non-clear speak of some of industry resolutions. We're as guilty as any other body in drafting things that are not easily understandable or readable for English mother tongue speakers, let alone other languages around the world. So we're also trying to introduce visuals as well, wherever possible, because the key is to restore confidence. And as Michael said, clean crew, clean aircraft, clean airport facilities with clean passengers for a confident restart.
Yeah, no, totally agree, Glyn. And just recapping now, and it's good that you said that about the level of understanding from the official documentation, because it's very legalistic and it's very structured. And you're right, we've spoken many times about it. So working on and moving on from the WHO initial 3C, the communications, cooperation and collaboration, that's so important, and that's clearly happening. Now we're at a stage where we need another 3Cs, which is all about clarification, so everybody can understand. And then it's coordination, and then it's some of the controls that have to be put in place. And some of those controls are actually moving boundaries, because we don't know some of the things that are happening. And the things that you guys are talking about, just, very quickly, you've got entry-exit temperature screening, you've got passenger contact tracing, you've got physical distancing, you've still got consideration of immunity passports, you've got PPE, you've got check-in, self-check-in, cleaning and disinfection, self-bag drops. You've got so many things to consider, but it's making those things as clear for the public so that they can see that none of the word exceptions is probably wrong, but none of the appreciation of the necessities to keep the businesses going contradicts with the official statements that are generalized for everybody. So it's that clarification and then coordination between all the airports and all the organizations, and then the control of that that's so important. So Michael, do you want to elaborate a little bit on anything from CART or CAPSCA that would be interesting for people to appreciate how, from an official perspective, you're trying to get down onto grounds level to make it as clear as possible for people to gauge their own risk on their own fear barrier or barometer, because that's what's happening now. People are going to have to take as much wise men speaking or what makes sense information, do their own risk assessment, which will then gauge when they're ready to go through a busy airport, to go through security, to go through check-in, to go through gate control, to go through shopping, whatever it is, to go where they really want to go.
Yeah, so let's distinguish. There are two phases, I think, that we need to think about. The first phase is the restart of the business. And we're beginning to see that. We're seeing that KLM has introduced flights. We're seeing that Lufthansa is going to be putting more flights on. Yeah. There are openings in terms of Delta is talking about putting on a flight from Atlanta to Paris Charles de Gaulle. So there is international flight starting. And the things that you do in the restart phase are things that, like social distancing, is that it is a lot easier when you don't have many passengers moving through an airport. It's a lot easier to have social distancing, and whether that's 2 meters as recommended by the ECDC, or 6 feet by the US CDC, or 1 meter as recommended by the WHO. All of these are measures which are going to limit where people are going to be able to move within an airport.
Yeah.
We've estimated that if you were to apply social distancing, you would only be able to operate an airport at around about 20 to 40% capacity.
Correct.
And clearly that has a knock-on for what passengers want to do, because let's focus on passengers. But it also has implications for the services that the airlines would be able to offer. So in the restart phase, there are things that you may be able to do that you would not be able to do in a recovery phase. And that's the phase where you've got to look at alternatives to the physical distancing. And clearly, one of the options that we've been looking at, and we had a very long conversation about this in CAPSCA this morning, is about wearing masks, i.e. face coverings.
Yeah.
We're very keen not to recommend that people should be wearing medical masks, because that then takes away from the health services which are in desperate need. But they need to be effective. And you've probably already seen that in some airports, they are already requiring people to wear masks.
Yep.
And on some aircraft as well. And I'd be interested in Glyn's comments about wearing masks on aircraft. But the idea is not so much that you are protecting yourself from infection, but you're protecting your fellow travelers.
Yep.
And it's a sort of I protect you, you protect me sort of approach.
Yep.
And so we were very pleased to see in a European Commission document that was published on Wednesday that they are talking about the idea that where social distancing is not possible, then face masks may be worn. So they're not explicit, but they are opening up the door to saying that whilst social distancing is preferred, then there are alternatives that can be considered. So we think that's really important, that first of all, that the health authorities and the advisors are saying that there is an alternative to the physical distancing. We also think it's really important, and this is this question about public confidence, that provided people understand that whilst physical distancing may be preferred, then mutual mask wearing is actually pretty effective as well. And so it is part of this sort of confidence building in that we will be doing things that will run throughout the airport that will help reduce the number of touch points. We will be providing structured hygiene. We'll be providing places where people are able to clean their hands. But we will be making it a very much cleaner, and let's face it, airports are already very, very clean. It's one of the things that people judge us on.
Yeah.
I mentioned airport service quality, and that is one of the things that is most important to passengers, is that everything is clean, particularly the bathrooms. So we already provide a clean facility, but obviously, airports are going to be stepping up and making it even more so. And so all of these things will come together to improve passenger confidence, and to make the environment as and I can't say sterile because it's not sterile, but as clean as it possibly can be. So that's the process we're moving towards.
Yeah, and that's the thing you just said there, as much as it possibly can be, and that's what people have to understand, because people are talking about when we get back to normal, there will be no normal as we knew it. It's going to be something new. And it has to be something new because there's been so much learning. And one of the things that I think definitely is going to take a lot more focus and thought is actually on health and hygiene. And that's going to become really, really apparent. And it's going to be something that everybody thinks a lot more of as we come through this. Now, you've done very nicely there with taking us through the importance of clarification, coordination, and certain controls. And now, Glyn, back to you and on to another 4 C's, which is consistency, contingency, and continuity. So one of the most important things now is that whatever we do, and this is why I think everybody is so confused around the world, everybody is doing things differently. Yeah. It's the same virus, it's the same objective, it's the same concerns with whichever country's health organisation has to try and battle against it. So most of the things are the same, yet so many people are doing things differently. So one of the most important things now is to start getting some consistency, and then also have contingency, because, and again, I'm not an expert, and I would never even suggest I was anywhere near, but I generally think there's definitely going to be a second wave, and there's going to be a bounce back and a pullback. So people have to know that there's certain contingency plans out there, and it doesn't go automatically from everybody putting governments and organisations under pressure to open up or to have an exit strategy and then straight back again to lockdown. So the contingency and the continuity balances are going to be something that's so necessary moving forward.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. And as we've already seen as certain states have reduced or released and relaxed some of the lockdown, you've seen the critical R factor, which is the rate of infection in terms of one infected person, how many people do they subsequently infect, risen, as you would expect. But as long as it doesn't get to that, as it were, critical factor, which then places, as it were, additional and overall stress on the health system that's unable to cope, it's still considered manageable. But to one of your points, I'd like to just come back to one thing that I think Michael was saying, which is so critical, which is public confidence in aviation. Because the airports, Michael's quite rightly said, probably some of the cleanest facilities you'll ever encounter. It's just been a good passenger experience. It's always been a clean passenger experience, considering the number of people that pass through. Almost every airport on this planet has had a wonderful experience. The same is true of the aircraft experience. In terms of the air quality,
that's very good. Yeah,
the HEPA filters that are employed on board, and it's not just the filters, but it's also the process by which the air is actually recycled, because it's recycled upwards. It's extracted vertically. You can have extraction systems which go left to right, front to back, or bottom, and they all promote actually transmission or widespreading communication of any microbes in the air. But air recycling, which is extracted vertically up, is actually the best one and most conducive of creating the right environment to limit and absolute mitigate against the spread of germs. But as Michael said, you can't say it's a clinically sterile environment. Some people have talked about, well, for social distancing or physical distancing, don't book the middle seat, keep the middle seat empty. That's not practical or viable. Fares would have to go up dramatic 50% to actually cover that loss of potential there. So that's not a viable source. It's more about good hygiene practices, as had been expressed today. A mask helps protect us from others, but also we protect ourselves by washing our hands regularly. Don't touch the ears, the eyes, the mouth when you've come into contact with a surface, and regularly have hand sanitizers. I think, to Michael's question, you will find different airlines will come around probably regularly with hand sanitizers. I think, interestingly enough, hand sanitizer is alcohol-based, so it does and is subject to dangerous goods provisions or regulations. So if you want to put large quantities on board an aircraft, it has to be done so with the expressed approval of the Civil Aviation Authority, which clearly will happen, but you need to register and confirm that you want to do that. The same with the provisions of masks and other things, because passengers need to feel confident, but passengers also need to take responsibility, as we do ourselves in society, to protect ourselves. I think you'll find that every time you will go into an event nowadays, Chris, we'll probably see far less handshaking. You and I won't kiss each other on the cheek the next time we see each other, which I'm pleased about. It's a practice I've tried to stop for years, but you still insist. But I think, coming back to your question about, and you have so many C's, I forgot which C's you were asking me to comment on now.
There's a couple of C's that I would sling at you, Glyn, but we wouldn't be able to keep it on it. No, the one I'm talking about now is consistency, contingency, and continuity.
Yeah, well, I think, let's consistency is something which is critical, and I think, Michael and I have both talked about that. Is whatever restart looks like, it needs to be consistently managed, because the whole world needs to be able to do it in a harmonized fashion, and that's where public confidence will be absolutely maximized. And the same is applied for security provisions. We're used to taking our shoes off, to taking our laptops out. If you came through an airport somewhere in the world and just whizzed through without going through a personal scanner, without taking anything out, without your checked-in bag being checked, you would feel uncomfortable, because it's an exposure. So it's about protecting the system. With regards to contingency, I think one of the things that this event has taught us is that there was no effective contingency plans in place. Nobody had.
Exactly.
If you look at what the industry was preparing for, 9/11 was considered the worst type of crisis that the industry could face, which would be, as it were, an attack on the navigations or the aircraft itself in a focused or a minimal perspective. But when something has tackled the whole world, it's also interesting, and I think you touched upon it, Chris, it's interesting how states have tackled a global situation. They've tackled it from a national perspective. The first thing is you put your borders up and you deal with each country has dealt with it separately. and which is interesting as well to look at afterwards when this whole event is consigned to history books, to look at and say, well, how should you tackle global crisis? You tackle, we have the EU, but we didn't tackle this at an EU level. The EU has published some guidelines now, but individual states have actually, and will continue to take separate decisions on how they open up. So I think it'll be an interesting study to see how society looks at problems and further challenges when they come up in future, as they will. I think we should be better prepared now. And I think that's something as well that this has taught us, is that we need to have much more robust contingency plans in place.
Yeah, no, definitely, Glyn. And the last set of C's, so coming back to you, Michael, is where we are now, is obviously, and you touched on it early, and Glyn, you've endorsed it, is consideration. So it's consideration for others, how we respect what has to be done, how we respect that there's going to be deviations or there's going to be slight differences, when it's to do with things that are, shall we say, critically important. So there has to be a little more risk taken. And then that in itself brings us to a level of confidence. And overall, what everybody has to do now moving forward is take a lot more care. So some of the things that you guys are doing together, if you just want to elaborate on any of those, Michael, that would be appreciated.
I think it's worth going back a step to the consistency question first, because that is exactly the work that CART and the drafting group are doing, is to provide a sort of an overall perspective, but also to provide specific guidance for each of the modules, each of the sections that are going to be dealt with. And for example, the aircraft manufacturers have said, you've got to be quite careful when you are trying to clean an aircraft, that you don't use chemicals which are potentially damaging either to the systems or to the aircraft itself. And so they've actually come down to a very simple solution, which is isopropyl alcohol, 70%, which is the same stuff that's in hand sanitizer. So, if we can approach this from this common background, and so we say, well, we're going to do this approach for this thing, we're going to do that thing, and so we've got this, again, going back to a comment that Glyn made much earlier on, is that it has been remarkable how well ICAO has functioned, and how well the CART process has functioned. It's I think it is a credit to ICAO that it has worked so well. It's also a credit to ICAO that it has engaged with industry right from the outset, and it has taken advantage of our pragmatic, our technical, and our sort of wide-reaching capabilities in this to bring out a proposal which is going to be easier for us to implement. And that then takes you to the next point, which is, you have the consistency in terms of the guidance, but you also have this confidence, this care. All of these things, I think, are built up because there has been this working together from the outset. So in terms of, you said at the beginning that you thought, what can we bring as a sort of like an uplifting, a sort of an optimistic approach to all of this? And I think that it is one that shows that, when there is a crisis, the regulators and the industry can work together, and that they can sort of bring their own different expertise to solve common problems. And I think that should give a degree of confidence to the traveling public as well, is that there are not some sort of ideas which are being imposed, which are not practicable, and therefore there are going to be exceptions and so on and so forth. So I think that what we have seen is a global pandemic, which has actually elicited a global response. And I am optimistic that once we got the report from the CART out and it goes to the States, then we'll have this sort of consistency of approach in its implementation.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's so important, so important. And what it also endorses is when the tough gets going, when the going gets tough, the tough can get going, and it's something that needs to continue, because the legacy of waste of time and effort and people putting up opposition, and we need to have more enablers now moving forward than we do blockers.
Yes.
And I think that's something from a cultural perspective that also, please God, will change everywhere as we move forward. So guys, listen, just coming up close to the end now, what I'd like to ask each of you, if you were able to wave a magic wand and come up with 3 actions that you would like to see stay after we start to come out of this, what would those 3 things be? Glyn?
Well, I would say, well, that's, you give me like 10 seconds to think about those. So,
yeah, but you love that, Glyn, because that's all the time you have when I normally give you a kiss when we meet, my friend.
That's true. But I would think certainly coming out, which is what Michael and I both talked about, I think that the way that the international regulatory and trade bodies have actually come together and worked collaboratively has been remarkable. I mean,
Yep.
it has been single, common, focused objectives. It's been timely. It's been phenomenally engaging and collaborative. I was also on a call earlier. We had a CART drafting group call. And it's just the way that everybody is stepping up to make sure that this material is produced in a timely and consistent and usable fashion. So I would hope that that continues beyond this situation. I would also hope the industry, you said I can have 3, yes? 3?
Yeah.
I think the spirit of industry innovation, and I'm going to throw out 3 C's, another 3 C's, which is dealing with an issue which has been a critical capacity crisis.
Yeah.
And the way that, if you think about it, once you have 2/3 of the world's passenger fleet grounded,
Yeah.
in a way, pretty much 40% of the global capacity that air cargo historically relies upon. And when you consider that the air cargo demand now for moving critical medical supplies has basically gone through the chart in terms of time required and urgent needed around the world, the way that the airlines actually stepped up, and again, I look at some of the material we've worked collaboratively with the international regulatory agencies in putting together guidance material to do safety risk assessment when using passenger aircraft for cargo-only operations. There's now over 100 carriers around the planet are using some of their passenger fleet for cargo operations.
Yeah.
1,100 aircraft. And when you think about how much PPE is actually still required, and we're talking about even greater demand as people now mix in with social lockdown being relaxed in somewhat, that means that there's an increased demand even further for trying to get access to these masks, not wanting to take them away from the critical medical and health service people that need them. So I think that industry innovative approach to tackling this, I think, is critical. Plus, I think there's a third element of this, which is a more personal aspect, and I would want to steal 4, but I'm going to stick with the 3, is the way that we've tackled ourselves and how we appreciate things differently. I appreciate technology more. I've been stuck working at home now.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And just the ability to do this, communicate still, collaborate with documents. My team is 30 people. We're highly dispersed now, but we're still working as effectively as we were before in terms of collaboration, and the same from the social side. And I think annexed to that is I think that we will appreciate the time that we get to see and spend with people in a face-to-face environment much more. And I think we will appreciate those things going forward.
Very good. Thank you, Glyn. Michael?
So I have the benefit of having had a little bit of thinking time.
Pressure's on the content. Another C.
So I think there are one lesson that we have particularly learned from this, in addition to those that Glyn refers to, and I agree with everything that Glyn has said, by the way. So that means that I'm on to number 4 now. I think that one of the things that we are appreciating much more is the importance of data and science.
Yep.
In that, we are looking to the science to help us reach the answers, and I think that has been something that has been developing over the years in terms of our effort as airports. When we go to ICAO, we take data, we take science, and when we try to use that as part of our advocacy effort. And I think that it really has come home in terms of dealing with this crisis. The second, and again, it's a lead on from what we have been doing, particularly with ICAO. ICAO has, in the past, it has been a very somnolent organization, and I talked at the beginning about how long it takes to produce standards and recommended practices. The reform of ICAO, I think, is long overdue, and I think that this might be a catalyst to saying, how can we do things differently? How can we do them more efficiently so that we can reach conclusions more quickly, and that those conclusions are better thought through and are more practical and more effective. And then the third thing is that we need to take the lesson from dealing with this very much a here and now crisis to not taking our eye off the ball on the sort of the longer burn crisis, and that is with respect to climate change. And if we can apply the same sort of approach that we have applied with respect to COVID-19 pandemic to what we need to do to address climate change, and to demonstrate to the public, to an increasingly skeptical public, that aviation is a force for good, that we can develop sustainably, and I think particularly post-COVID, to demonstrate the value of aviation as again, a driver, a catalyst to sustainable development, and that is economic, social, and environmental, particularly for developing countries, particularly for small island developing states, where tourism is a huge industry. It has been very, very badly hit by COVID-19. And I think that if we can, again, bring ourselves together and to promote aviation as a tool for good and for sustainable development, then I think that that is going to be a huge benefit that will come out of the way that we have been able to pull together with respect to this crisis. So there's your silver lining, if ever there was.
No, you're right. Thanks, guys, because with that sort of balanced, caring, and confident approach, it doesn't have to be either them and us, or swinging fast, swinging left, swinging right. Things have got to be now things that make sense, and for everything, as everybody's seen now in the environment, from pollution, animals coming into your back gardens, your high streets, or whatever, it is a balance. And if we swing too far one way, something will come and correct in another. So guys, really appreciate the time that we've had together. It's coming to an end now, so I'm not sure if there's any final message you'd like to give to anybody, but for me, the most important thing is to show that people like yourselves, who represent other groups, other organisations, or parts of, first, they've got a lot of respect for you, because it's not an easy task to do, and especially when everybody wants so much, and people are a little bit reluctant these days to see positivity. So well done, greatly appreciated and respected. It was a long time coming, Glyn, huh? You didn't think I'd be saying that, did you? But seriously, well done, lads. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to end with?
Chris, if you wouldn't mind, can I just take 1 minute? I want to thank you, and it's been a pleasure talking to you with you, Michael, and thank you for inviting me. I would just like to say a quick message to your audience. I know many of whom are frontline logistical employees, whether not freight forwarders, truckers, airport workers, ground handlers, flight crew, dispatch crew, customs officers, whatever, is just, again, our appreciation and thanks for them. Whilst we've been home working for the last 8 weeks, they've been out there, putting themselves on the front line, working with the medical staff, making sure that they had the equipment they needed. So I think we owe them a debt of gratitude that will last longer than this crisis. We'll always be grateful for what they've been doing. So thank you for this vehicle to say that.
No, appreciate it. Michael?
So yes, again, thank you, and again, thanks to Glyn for a very good discussion, and I would certainly like to echo the remarks that he made at the end, because it is absolutely essential that people are able to use what services we have, and we do, fully understand that times are not easy for anybody involved in this. So again, thank you to both of you for having a good conversation, and thanks to all the frontline staff for the work that they're doing. Thank you.
Well, it's really appreciated, and you're right, both of you. And we try on every single show to show our respect and appreciation to everybody, from obviously the nurses, doctors, but cleaners, people who do the meals, every single person that keeps this whole world of ours going. They really are heroes. And the one thing that, please God, everybody will do after this is have a long memory. So guys, thank you very much. The last C of the day is Chris saying goodbye, and thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again, and really, really appreciated all your comments and your input. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.